Silent Hill 2, the sequel to an unassuming, critical, and sales success. Team Silent would improve on their previous work in every way here, venturing to go even further into the depths of Silent Hill. But what about this game makes it a masterpiece, most considering it the best in the series and some of the best horror ever created? I've been waiting for a long time to talk about this game, as it's one of my favorites of all time, so I'd like to just get right into it. Today, we're going to dive deep into Silent Hill 2. We'll cover story, gameplay, mechanics, and everything in between. For reference, I played and captured most of my footage of Silent Hill 2 on the Enhanced Edition for PC, which is a fan project that has diligently worked to upgrade the outdated and unsupported PC port. If you haven't seen my Silent Hill 1 retrospective, it's not required, but if you want more context, I would go check it out now. Spoiler warning for Silent Hill 1 and 2. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son. And today, I want to talk about Silent Hill 2. Development on Silent Hill 2 began in June 1999, as soon as the first game was completed. Since it was a financial success, Konami wanted to move forward with the sequel. Team Silent also wanted to work on the sequel because they were frustrated with the limitations of the PlayStation during development on the first game, and were seeking out more creative freedom on the PlayStation 2. Team Silent was again working on the sequel with some changes in team members' responsibilities. Takeyoshi Sato returned to complete character design and CG work on the game. He was also responsible for coming up with the premise of the game, taking inspiration from Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. The main writing for the game was done by Sato and Hiroyuki Iwaku, the enemy programmer for Silent Hill 1. The story was conceived first, and the game was developed out of that. The team wanted to focus even more on the psychological elements this time around, and have the player reflect the evil of Silent Hill. They wanted to combine the elements of horror and drama, creating an atmosphere that would shock, but that would also horrify. Sato also returned to do the CG work for the sequel. Motion capture was used, but Sato said that he couldn't trust it on account of it only taking positions of face points and favoring completing the work by hand. Each character was taken into account. The designs of each face reflect the characters themselves. Sato put time into designing all the characters to intuit certain emotions in the player, and all of them give details about who they are. The inspirations for the game are miles long. Directors like David Cronenberg, David Fincher, David Lynch, lots of Davids, and Alfred Hitchcock. Paintings by Francis Bacon, the 1992 game Alone in the Dark, and Junji Ito comics were among some of the other influences. Masahiro Ito was responsible for designing the monsters of Silent Hill 2. He worked on the first game as a background designer and said that his inspiration of the monsters in the sequel was soured flesh. He also wanted the monsters to incorporate an element of humanity. He based the distorted movements and contortions of some of the monsters on the walks of very drunk people or tentative children. Akira Yamaoka returned to compose the music for Silent Hill 2. He wrote Laura's theme in only 3 days. He was mostly concerned with his music evoking emotions in the player. Yamaoka also wanted to surprise audiences with sounds, but also use selective moments of silence in the game. Yamaoka wanted to get away from the formal sounds of something like Resident Evil and go towards something that would challenge the imagination. Silent Hill 2 was released on September 24th, 2001 for the PlayStation 2. To get this out of the way in the beginning, for most of this video you'll be seeing footage from the PC version of Silent Hill 2. It was the easiest to use for me, and it also has an enhanced edition, made by fans, that really does the game justice and makes it a lot more accessible. It has high-resolution texts, better load times, softer shadows, rendering, etc. For full transparency, there are going to be some people that would argue that this isn't the most pure way to play the game, and I totally understand that. I decided that I would sacrifice some slight purity of gameplay and presentation in exchange for convenience sake. That being said, there are multiple different versions of Silent Hill 2 that were released, all with their own changes. Silent Hill would go on to have Xbox and PC ports after its original release. The technical differences are quite a subject of their own, and if you're interested, Digital Foundry has a fantastic video on the ins and outs of those that I'll link in the description. The Greatest Hits re-release of Silent Hill on the PlayStation 2, though, introduced some new content, an extra scenario and another ending. Luckily, this content is in the Enhanced Edition, which we will be playing. They also released a port of Silent Hill 2 to the PlayStation 3 called the HD Collection, but don't you worry, we'll be getting there eventually, in another video. I'm going to take a similar approach as I did to the first game with the story of Silent Hill 2. I'll first go through the playthrough, talk about the gameplay, story, mechanics, and then we'll cover the real story. What really happened in Silent Hill 2, which is a little more complicated than the previous game. This real story is the story that Team Silent hides underneath the surface level, requiring more in-depth attention, research, and analysis. The game begins with the biggest choice of all, the difficulty level. Silent Hill 2 changes up the difficulty levels a bit. Now we have an action and a riddle difficulty. The action changes things related to the combat, enemies, and damage. The riddle difficulty changes how hard puzzles in the game are. For example, a safe puzzle we'll encounter later will change on each difficulty level. We find a memo that gives us the safe combo, but on easier riddle difficulties, it will just give us the code. On higher difficulties, some of the numbers will be replaced with Roman numerals, causing the puzzle to be slightly more difficult. For my main playthrough, I played on normal action and riddle difficulty. I played through hard difficulty on stream, and let's just say it was pretty rough. The game opens pretty quickly, showing us our new main character, James, looking in the mirror. James is in a bathroom, and as he exits, we hear a woman's voice narrating. It's a letter that James has received from his dead wife, saying that she's in Silent Hill.
In my restless dreams, I see that town, Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you.
I got a letter. The name on the envelope said, Mary. My wife's name. It's ridiculous. Couldn't possibly be true. That's what I keep telling myself.
He's just arrived and he's looking for her. We can already see the technical upgrades that have been made from the first game to this one. I know I'm using the Enhanced Edition, but I'll also include some emulated PS2 footage for comparison, and it's really not that far off. This game was incredibly impressive for its time and is a huge step up from Silent Hill. We have detailed character models now and environments. Everything from the last game has been kicked up a notch, and that's mostly the case for the entire game. James is wondering if Mary, his wife, is really alive, and he heads out to make his way into the town. We grab a map out of the car and head down the dirt path through the forest. This section through the woods sets the tone for the game to come. Team Silent said it was made this way on purpose. It was supposed to feel longer, so long that you wouldn't feel like turning back. They knew it was a risky decision, but they wanted to take the chance to make the player feel isolated. It works so well, and this slow walk through the woods, the sounds in the forest, you know what you're in for, and you know that you're alone in doing it. James meets a woman in the graveyard. Her name is Angela.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry. I
No,
was
it's
just...
okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
She tells us that something is wrong with this town. She says she's looking for her mother, and she can't find her father and brother. The dialogue here is pretty disjointed. It's another thing that's been taken up a notch in this game. Before, we had pauses between lines, but now it's full-on dream state dialogue. The people don't make sense. They ramble and make disconnected statements. It feels very disconcerting and surrealist.
It's kind of hard to explain, but
Is it dangerous?
maybe. And it's not just the fog either.
Okay,
It's...
I got it. I'll be careful.
I'm not lying.
No, I believe you. It's just... I guess I really don't care if it's dangerous or not. I'm going to town either way.
We'll get more into this later, but the things that people do in Silent Hill 2 never make sense. They do in contrast, but on a surface level, it's very unsettling. It does a lot for the atmosphere of the town and the game itself. Angela tells us that she hopes we find Mary, and we leave her in the graveyard, despondent. James heads further into town. The tank controls are back in this entry, but now we have the option of changing them. I really got used to them with the first game, so I didn't really feel the need to change them. James wanders through the empty town, making his way through the fog. We see something in the distance, a trail of blood leading to it. This game really does a much better job with the introduction of the town's horrors. In the previous game, we are assaulted by the air screamer, and all at once we know there are monsters in this town. They are flooding the streets and we have to avoid them. In Silent Hill 2, we are slowly introduced to the lying figure, the first enemy of the game, but it's preceded by this long reveal, the blood trail, the sounds from the fog, and eventually following it into this construction site. Once the reveal finally comes, we know something is wrong here, but that buildup of tension and interest is the best part. James finds the creature grabbing a wooden plank and giving us our first taste of combat. The combat in this game is very similar to the previous game. We hold the R2 button and press X to attack. I really don't think that there was much difference between the controls. There's some intricacies to combat that we'll get into later, but for now, it's mostly the same. We also gain the radio here.
This thing broken? What the? I better take it anyway. I might need it.
This will let us know when enemies are near, a heavy static pouring through the speakers. Silent Hill 2 introduces the feature to be able to adjust the volume on this radio. Overall, this serves the same purpose as it does in the original game, a melding of atmosphere and mechanics. It's a sound sonar blip that lets you know that something's out there, but the question remains, where or what? The map that we have has Rosewater Park as our destination. This is the first place that James thinks Mary is referencing in her letter as their special place. But it's kind of tough to get there right now, as most of our ways through are blocked off. James heads over to Saul Street and finds an abandoned RV with a note leading him to Neely's bar. Exploring the town of Silent Hill provides lots of extra ammo and health items. It's always worth going out of your way to get some extra items, but it's a risk. You're forcing yourself to go into a possibly terrifying situation, facing the horrifying enemies of the town to get some extra equipment. Silent Hill does the risk-reward system incredibly well in contrast to something like standard action games. In those, you're risking your progress by going out of your way, an in-game risk. Here, you're risking physical, in-life anxiety by going out of your way, forcing yourself to brave the streets just a little longer. This brings the mechanics out of the game and into the real world, which is fantastic. The town itself is just as atmospheric as the previous game. It's even bumped up a notch with the big technical leap. The fog, darkness, and flashlight all have been improved and serve to make the game more realistic and give it the ethereal feel that the developers were going for. It's still very much that dreamlike nightmare world, but now it just feels more real. Rather than experiencing an idea of a nightmare on the PlayStation 1, it feels like we're experiencing a real nightmare. When we get to Neely's bar, we find a map that has some destinations marked. We learn that we can get through to the park by going through the Woodside Apartments. We need the key to get in there though, which is on a corpse at the end of Martin Street. There's a note written in blood here that says, "There was a hole here. It's gone now." We head over to the apartments and enter. This is where the real game starts. Everything up to this point has been the prologue, setting the tone and introducing us to the elements. This is Silent Hill 2's elementary school. We enter and make our way to the second floor, looking for a way out, and we're immediately confronted with the claustrophobia of this environment. The hallways of the apartment building are tight. There's barely enough room to squeeze past an enemy. It's definitely possible, but it's not nearly as viable an option as before. On top of that, the dark hallways, only lit by our flashlight that we've recently gained, are terrifying. They inspire a closed-off feeling, isolated, one man against a plethora of unfamiliar monsters. We're introduced to another enemy, the mannequins. These are headless dummy dolls. They're on one hand abstract, legs sprouting from above and below. Ito here is taking the human form and distorting it just significantly enough to unsettle the player. The reason these monsters are so interesting here is that they create an unnerving feeling inherently. They do things that are terrifying, sure. They make noises that feel otherworldly. They move in strange ways, but you can just look at one of these and know that it feels off, out of place. It's not meant to be here, and something is wrong. The monsters in Silent Hill 2 are far superior to the ones in the first game, and this is what I meant when I said they would be stepped up in later entries. The enemies of the game also have another meaning in the story's context, but we'll get to that in a later section. James finds a handgun on the third floor in a shopping cart. We finally have the ability to shoot enemies, which is much easier to do than beating them with wood. We have to complete a puzzle involving a clock. There's a riddle on the wall that tells us about the hands of the clock and gives us one of their names, Scott. A memo in the other room will show us the names of each of the clock hands. We need to figure out which are which though, and we can figure this out by using the shape of the scratches on the wall or the starting letter of each of the names, which correspond with hour, minute, and seconds. Then we have to put the clock in the right position, which lets us move it, revealing a hole in the wall and letting us pass into another area of the apartment building. Before we enter this room, we're faced with the big enemy of this game, the one that probably everyone knows, the creeper insect. Just kidding, it's Pyramid Head. He first appears on the other side of the bars as a red glowing demon. He'll plague us throughout the entire game and sort of serves as the primary antagonist for a while. The apartment building is designed so well, just as most of the areas in the game. Not only does the inherent design provide fear, claustrophobia, and isolation, it also just flows incredibly well. Certain areas are blocked off in the beginning, whether by iron gates or another building that we can't access. But we never access the other areas in orthodox ways. It's always shoving a clock out of the way to get to another room or jumping through a fire escape door into the window of another building. It's genius and just adds to the surrealist feel of the game. It works so well in cementing the world of Silent Hill in this dreamlike state. We try to get a key upstairs, just out of reach past some iron bars, but a girl comes out of one of the rooms and kicks the keys out of our reach before running away. James enters one of the apartment building rooms and sees Pyramid Head, standing and torturing some of the mannequins. James hides in the closet, and Pyramid Head senses him. James fires off some rounds, and this causes Pyramid Head to leave the room. We have to get 3 coins to solve a puzzle in the next apartment building. We find one in the garbage chute, along with a memo about a man who murdered his family in town. Another one of the coins is in a baby carriage in the apartment building pool. The third is located in one of the apartments, and we happen to find Angela in here. She's playing with a knife. She's contemplating doing something with the knife, but James asks about her mother.
But you're the same as me. It's easier just to run. Besides, is what we deserve.
No, I'm not like you.
Angela says she can't find her. Throughout the course of this scene, Angela starts to get increasingly angry, irrationally lashing out at James for small things.
How do you know that?
Well, I just figured, 'cause this is where you're looking for her. How else would I know?
Yeah. Will you hold it for me?
Sure. No problem.
If I kept it, I'm not sure what I might do.
A lot of people in this game do this. It's in line with the dream state and unnerving feeling that we're supposed to take away from these scenes. It's very Lynchian and creates that same tension and unnatural feel. Angela leaves to look for her mother and leaves her knife. In another part of the building, we find a man puking in a toilet, a dead body in the fridge just outside.
I didn't do anything. I swear.
He's adamant that he didn't kill the guy, but it kinda seems like he did. Silent Hill 2 not only goes for this unnerving fear and isolation, but it also tries to develop this gross, nasty feeling. Everything in the game looks foul. The walls are dirty and rusting. Eddie's disgusting, visceral vomiting sounds go on for quite a while.
It wasn't me.
One of the first shots of the game is a dirty, nasty bathroom. It really creates a hellish, disgusting environment. Everything is reduced to its most broken down form. Eddie says he got scared and ran into the bathroom, but that he definitely didn't kill that guy. He says he isn't from Silent Hill. Something brought him here. James tells him to get out of here and be careful. We cross over into the other building through a fire escape door that leads to a window. James fishes a wallet out of the toilet, which has a safe code inside, netting us a ton of extra ammo. The other interesting thing about Silent Hill 2's puzzles is that most of them, at least the ones that require numbered codes, are random. This makes it so that most of the time you can't just look up the solution. You're still forced to figure it out on your own. Now that we have all 3 coins, we can solve the coin puzzle. The riddles are very different on each of the difficulty levels, but we're on the normal level. At one end sits the seducer of She. This is the snake, referencing the Garden of Eden. The wind from behind the woman doth play tells us that there's a space between the prisoner and the snake, as the prisoner's back is turned. The formless one, Null, lies furthest from they, is saying there's an empty spot at the other end. The old one, beside the serpent, sits not. This tells us the old man is not beside the snake, therefore he must be beside the prisoner. Each of the puzzles in this game are incredibly intricate, and they're a whole other aspect that's introduced to the series. They take Silent Hill's puzzles up a huge jump and force you to think through them, reading every word and trying different things. Not only does the game have the challenge of the action and the horror, but the challenge of the mind as well. Every word in the riddles matter, and it's important to pay attention to each one. I just generally love the attention to detail here, and it seems like so much work was put into every one of the puzzles. Opening this box gives us the Lynn House key. This gives us access to room 209 and access to the balcony to room 208. In here, we find the apartment stairway key and head down the final stairway of the apartment complex. Inside, Pyramid Head is torturing another one of the monsters, and we have our first boss fight, which really isn't a fight at all. Pyramid Head has us trapped in a room, and there's no way out. We really just have to bide our time and try not to get hit because we can't kill him. We can shoot him a few times, but eventually an alarm sounds and he leaves. The water on the next floor down dissipates and we can head out of the apartment complex. Through the alleys, we see Laura, the girl that kicked the key earlier.
It was you, wasn't it? You're the one who stepped on my hand.
I don't know. Maybe I did.
What's a little girl like you doing here anyway?
Huh? Are you blind or something?
What's that letter?
None of your business. You didn't love Mary anyway.
Wait! How do you know Mary's name?
This doesn't make sense because we don't know this girl, and she shouldn't have known Mary. We head into Rosewater Park, hoping to find Mary herself there.
Mary? No, you're not.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
No, my late wife. I can't believe it. You could be her twin. Your face, your voice, just your hair and clothes are different.
My name is Maria.
I'm looking for Mary. Have you seen her?
Didn't you say she died?
Oh yeah, 3 years ago. But I got a letter from her. She says she was waiting in our special place.
And that's here? Anyway, I haven't seen her. Is this your only special place?
Well, there's the hotel too, I guess.
She's coming with us now. Mary will follow us around at different points in the game, and we have to protect her. If she dies, it's a game over for us, so it's pretty important to make sure she doesn't take damage. It's definitely manageable here, and even though I was worried about the escort mission gameplay, it didn't really bother me that much. It was only a problem on hard difficulty in some certain circumstances. Maria will follow you into small rooms, but she doesn't get in the way. In a tiny space, instead of following you, Maria will just stand in one spot and let you explore. James heads to Pete's Bowl-O-Rama, a bowling alley just west of Rosewater Park. Inside, Eddie is eating pizza and talking to Laura.
Nah, nothing like that.
Huh? You're just a gutless fatso.
What'd you have to say that for?
I thought you said the cops were after you.
No, I just ran because I was scared.
James shows up and Eddie doesn't really pay attention to him. Laura runs away when James shows himself, heading outside.
Wait! Come back! Eddie, let's go after her.
Huh? Laura? But why?
Laura, is that her name?
That's what she said.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
Maria saw Laura run past, but she was too fast for her. We trace her back through an alley and into a bar called Heaven's Night, which Maria has a key for. Eventually, we track her to Brookhaven Hospital. This is the next large area we'll be spending time in. There's always something terrifying about a hospital, and it's probably why Team Silent continuously goes back to them. They can be cold and callous, representing life or death. This one is incredibly dark and unsettling. We collect some keys and items, exploring the 3 floors of the hospital, and we're introduced to a new enemy, the Bubblehead Nurse. This is easily one of my favorite enemy designs in the entire series. Not only is it incredibly iconic, it's the epitome of what I was talking about earlier. The design itself is inherently unsettling. A bandaged, bleeding head, full nurse gear still on. They move forward, contorting their bodies and twisting their figures. It's terrifying to look at, let alone face in combat. On top of that, you can hear them down the hall, the gurgles and shrieks echoing off the walls. We get to a room on the 3rd floor and Maria decides to lay down. She's tired and takes some pills, but says that it's just a hangover. James decides to go out and continue looking for Laura. We grab the roof key from the desk and head upstairs. There's a diary up here. A patient who didn't want to live anymore from the hospital reflects on his state and life. Reading this diary will affect which ending we get. Like I said before, Silent Hill 2 has multiple endings, but they are less affected by choices and side quests, and more affected by the way we play the game and the small things that we interact with. This creates another level of interaction with the player, their actions reflected in the ending of the game. It also fosters replayability, being able to unlock all of the endings or even just figuring out what affects the game. Suddenly, Pyramid Head appears and knocks James off the roof and back into the building. Luckily, it was into an area that we didn't have access to before. The next big puzzle we have to face is the box. We find a locked and chained box inside of one of the hospital rooms. We need 2 keys to remove the chains, and we need 2 codes to remove the locks. One of the codes is pretty straightforward. We find it in a typewriter in the hospital. The other one is not so straightforward. One of the padded cells in the hospital has a message scrawled on the wall in blood. This is one of the only codes that isn't actually in a memo, so it doesn't appear in the memo's menu. Therefore, we have to actually use our brains and remember it. On top of that, whoever did the scrawling didn't have the best handwriting. This code is a little hard to read, and on top of just remembering, we have to try multiple combinations to figure out what it could be. This code is also different each time you play the game, and there's even a popular video on YouTube that shows you how each integer is represented in-game so you can figure it out easier. I definitely, super did not use this video at all, Dad. When we finally open the box, this big, massive thing that's taken so many pieces to get it working, it almost feels like the end of the hospital section. Like, this is what we've been building up to. It's gotta be something great, right? Yeah, it's a piece of hair. I love this little reveal because it just tracks for a mental hospital that someone would do this or just even have sentimentality for an item like this, obviously exaggerated to a degree. But the hair actually does become useful. We need to use it along with a needle that we've found to fish out an elevator key from the drain. We find Laura down in one of the abandoned rooms and she's playing by herself. She's somehow been wandering around and hasn't gotten hurt, and James has her follow him out of the room.
How do you know about Mary?
What's the big deal?
Why can't you just tell me?
You gonna yell at me if I don't?
No, I won't.
I was friends with Mary. We met at the hospital. It was last year.
You liar! Laura,
Laura says there's a letter from Mary that she has to find, and James follows her as she leads him into a room. She closes the door behind James and locks him inside as we face our second boss, the Flesh Lips. These are hanging creatures, a mass of limbs and human meat on tracks coming after us. They have legs hanging down and will try to swing into us, and also strangle James with their feet. The main strategy is pretty similar to most of the other bosses, at least on normal. We run across from one side of the room to the other, get a couple shots off, and run back. When we defeat the final one, we see a strange transition, and suddenly we're outside in the garden. We enter back inside and the hospital has changed. We're now in the alternate version of it, the first alternate version that we'll experience in Silent Hill 2. It's not as much of a drastic change as the first game, it's more subtle, and I think I like this implementation more. We're not seeing steel grating floors, we're seeing disgusting walls and an even more ruined building, showing the descent further down. It's also just a fantastic idea of getting very familiar with an area and then being thrust back in that area and realizing that you know nothing about it all of a sudden. Any sense of comfortability that you had is now gone, and that is a great place for fear to bloom. We move through the halls of the hospital, finding Maria to be gone from the room that we left her in. Eventually, James pushes open a shelf to find a secret opening, and Maria returns.
James!
Mary? Oh, Maria. It's you. I thought you were... Sorry. Anyway, I'm glad you're alive.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? You don't sound very happy to see me. I was almost killed back there. Why didn't you try to save me?
James tells her that they found Laura, but she ran away. Maria says they have to find Laura and protect her. We have to find 2 rings in the hospital to open a door with hands sprouting from it. On our way down the elevator, an announcer's voice comes over the radio, telling us that James is on a game show.
Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to another exciting edition of Trick or Treat. Here you either answer the questions correctly and win a great prize, or fail to answer correctly and receive the punishment.
He asks us trivia questions about Silent Hill's history that can be answered using the map and memos that we found previous. James heads to the hospital storeroom and finds a box where he can input his answers to the trivia questions. We get a ton of supplies when we finally open the box. With both rings collected, we can open the hand door, and we find a memo telling us that the key to the museum has been hidden. That's our next destination, but heading downstairs, Pyramid Head shows up. He chases us down a hallway, and Maria doesn't make it inside the elevator in time to escape. She's killed, slaughtered by Pyramid Head's great knife. This is a particularly horrific moment for James. His wife is dead, he watched her die 3 years ago, and now he's forced to relive that moment with a woman who looks just like her. We head upstairs and find the key to the museum and a path to get there, as the rest of the way is blocked off. Before we head there, James sees Laura wandering outside of the hospital. We head across town, making our way to the spot on our map. On the way, we can go back to Neely's bar, the place where we found the map to the apartment key. Now, there's a message on the wall. If you want to see Mary, you should just die. Who could have left this here? We head over to the marked spot, and there's a note. It tells us that the key to the museum is buried in Rosewater Park. The note, at first, seems like a reminder to whoever wrote it, someone from the hospital possibly, as it mentions a patient. But at the end, the note directly addresses James and tells him that if he doesn't wish to stop, then the Lord should have mercy on his soul. We don't wish to stop, so we head to Rosewater Park and dig up the box behind the statue. The key to the Silent Hill Historical Society is inside. A short ways up the road, we open the museum and head in. On the outside, it looks pretty small, but there's a lot more here than meets the eye. Inside, there are paintings of Brookhaven Hospital and other places throughout the history of the town. There's also a painting of Pyramid Head himself, which seems particularly out of place. We find a large hole in the wall and descend a very long staircase that plunges deep into the depths of the labyrinth we're about to explore. We come out on the other side into Luca Prison. This was definitely one of the most terrifying areas in the game because it blends so well with the small previous area and into the next one. It's all one big mass and it has no rules. It doesn't obey the bounds of physicality. We quickly find a hole. Jumping down it puts us at the bottom of a well. We have to inspect every inch of the wall until we find one spot that's out of place. Smashing this spot reveals a door. Deeper in these twisted halls, the building has turned on itself. The hallways are leading downwards, and a gate blocks our path. We get stuck in a room and our flashlight goes out. Luckily, we picked up a battery in the hospital, but now the room is swarming with bugs and we need to enter a code to leave. The worn-out buttons tell us which ones we need to press, but we don't know in what order. Once we get out, the key that we found in the room will let us jump down the hallway hole. This puts us in the prison proper, and Eddie is in a room and seems to have come to terms with killing.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head. Pow!
You killed him?
But it wasn't my fault.
He's killed someone else, but he says he was provoked. Eddie leaves the room with the gun in hand. We have to collect 3 plates in this area for our next puzzle. The plate of the oppressor, gluttonous pig, and seductress. Using these on the statue outside will cause a horseshoe to appear on the door. We collect a wax doll and a lighter in the prison as well that lets us make a handle for a hatch in the floor. One of the best things about this game are the monsters we don't see. The creatures that we have to fight are terrifying for sure, but there's many enemies in the game whose looks we aren't privy to. In the prison, there's some creature behind one of the cells that's making terrible noises as we walk by, but we never see it. This implies it's something awful and lets our mind wander. Our imagination is allowed to run wild and conjure up all sorts of terrifying things. This happens a lot in the game. The sound of something breathing heavily in the next room when returning to the room Maria slept in the Brookhaven Hospital. Again in the prison, there's a visiting room that's been crashed through in the center. Something huge and massive had to have broken through here. What is it? What could be so powerful and large to do such a thing? We don't know, but I know for sure it's terrifying. We gain the hunting rifle here, a long-range weapon that will help us near the end game quite a bit, and afterwards head down the hatch. The hatch drops us into a morgue with another deep hole we have to jump into, which leads us into a corridor with another deep hole we'll jump into. After this, we'll board an elevator that will take us down even further into the depths of the underground. This brings us to the labyrinth. What makes this area so interesting is not the horrifying creatures, the music, or atmosphere. It's the simplicity of it all. It still has that dirty feel. The walls are smeared with dirt and the floors with blood, but it's all just so normal. How is some maze of house-like walls this far underground? Its simplicity is the part that's off-putting about it. There's something telling us that this isn't normal and that it shouldn't be here. It gets a little less simplistic pretty soon because the tan walls quickly turn into pools of water and mud partitions when we climb down ladders. We have to solve a puzzle concerning this box of faces. There's a room behind us, but turning the box will shift the room. We have to shift it enough to reveal a staircase and head down it. Maria's at the bottom, on the other side of some bars.
You're alive! Maria, I thought that thing killed you. Are you hurt bad?
Not at all silly.
Maria? That thing! It stabbed you! There was blood everywhere!
Stabbed me? What do you mean?
It chased us to the elevator, and then...
James, what are you talking about?
Just before! Don't you remember?
James, honey, did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else? You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel?
Maria?
You said you took everything, but you forgot that videotape we made. I wonder if it's still there.
How do you know about that?
She tries to comfort James and tells him to get onto the other side of the bars. We head back into the labyrinth. A pair of wire cutters now available to us will get us through a door that's covered with them. We can also find a room here that has Pyramid Head circling us. If we avoid him, we can get his great knife as our own weapon. Cutting the wires, heading through some more passageways, and traveling up and down ladders trying to find Maria's room, we'll eventually stumble upon Angela again. She's in a horrific flesh-walled room with a TV, telling her father to stop. When we enter, we have another boss fight. This is Abstract Daddy, or the Ideal Father. This boss will appear later in the game as normal enemies, so this fight is pretty simple. We just unload our shotgun into him and try to keep our distance. Eventually he goes down and Angela is distraught and smashes a TV over the creature's head.
Angela, relax.
Don't order me around!
I'm not trying to order you.
So what do you want then? Oh, I see. You're trying to be nice to me, right? I know what you're up to. It's always the same. You're only after one thing.
No, that's not true at all.
You don't have to lie. Go ahead and say it. Or you could just force me. Beat me up like he always did.
She lashes out at James, placing her blame on him. Angela was clearly the form of some sort of abuse, probably her father, and she has depression and rage because of it.
You said your wife Mary was dead, right?
Yes, she was ill.
Liar! I know about you. You didn't want her around anymore. You probably found someone else.
We have another puzzle to complete, this one a lot more complicated. There are two rooms, one with 6 hanged men and the other with 6 nooses. A lengthy riddle describes the crimes the 6 men were hung for, and we have to figure out which one is innocent. Reading into this, the arsonist is the only one who hasn't actually committed a crime and was just suspected. We have to match the arsonist with his noose in the other room and pull it. When we return to the room with the bodies, his is gone, and the key of the persecuted is in his place. This lets us unlock the handcuffs that are blocking the gate from opening.
Maria? Maria, no! What happened to you? Why?
James is again forced to watch, symbolically, his wife's death. We leave, and trying to go back in, James says he doesn't want to leave her, but he has to. We enter a graveyard, and all of the names on the tombstones are that of the characters we've met so far. Angela, Eddie, and even Walter Sullivan, the man that murdered his family from the papers. James has his own tombstone, and his grave happens to be open, which we have to jump down. Inside, we find a meat locker, and Eddie's killed someone else. This is our next boss fight. While Eddie is describing the reason he's killed the man on the ground, the shots are jumping back and forth, quick cuts everywhere. It's reflecting the insanity and psychosis that Eddie has slipped into.
From from now on, if anyone makes fun of me, I'll kill him. Just like that.
Eddie, have you gone nuts?
I knew it. You too. You're just like him, James.
Hey, I didn't mean anything.
Don't bother. I understand. You've been laughing at me all along, haven't you? Ever since we first met. I'll kill you, James!
The first phase of this fight is pretty simple. Eddie runs around the room, and we hit him as many times as we can with the pipe. He'll shoot us and punch us though, and honestly, this fight was really the only thing I didn't like about the game. It was kind of tedious. The second phase has us in the meat locker with frozen pigs hung up. Eddie is still talking about his kills.
You think it's okay to kill people? You need help, Eddie.
Don't get all holy on me, James! This town called you too! You and me are the same! We're not like other people! Don't you know that?
Unloading bullets into Eddie with the shotgun will finish this part pretty quick.
I killed a human being.
James is distraught at having killed another human being, and he mourns crossing that line. He then wonders if Mary really died 3 years ago before heading out to the docks. We row a boat across Toluca Lake, heading towards the light, and arrive at our final destination, the special place, Lakeview Hotel. Our next goal here is to collect 3 music boxes from around the hotel. We need them to solve our next puzzle. In the process, Laura scares James in the dining room.
You're here to find Mary, aren't you, James? Well, have you?
No. Is that why you're here too?
She's here, isn't she? If you know where she is, tell me. I'm tired of walking.
I wish I knew.
But she said it in her letter.
What letter?
She explains that Mary and her became friends when she was in the hospital and gives James a letter from Mary. She tells Laura that she had hoped to adopt her, but that she's going to pass away soon. She also tells Laura to take it easy on James. At the end, she wishes Laura a happy 8th birthday, but when James asks Laura her age, she says she turned 8 a week ago, so Mary couldn't have died 3 years ago. Laura had another letter from Mary, but she dropped it somewhere and runs to go find it. While collecting music boxes, James finds a note referencing the tape that Maria was talking about. He finds it in the office along with the final music box. We have to get downstairs at one point, but the elevator has a weight limit and won't move with all of James's items on him. We're forced to leave all of our equipment in a locker and go downstairs. We don't get it back for a bit, and this really strips us of every bit of protection we've had throughout the game, making us feel defenseless. We don't exactly have to face the hardest enemies here or anything. We can simply run past them, but at this stage in the game, knowing that we have nothing to fight back with is a genuinely terrifying feeling. The 3 music boxes we have must be placed in different slots in a music player in the lobby. We have a Cinderella box, Snow White, and Little Mermaid. We match the boxes up with the corresponding riddles that describe the associated princess. Once we do, the music begins to play and we get the hotel stairway key. We finally arrive at the room Mary and James were staying in, their special place. But Mary isn't here. There's a VCR, and James plays the tape that they made, and the big reveal of the game is made. Now, Dad, I'm going to give you one final chance to turn back. If you've watched this far and you haven't played this game and don't know what happens, and you've also found yourself thinking it might be something you're interested in, I would argue that you should probably turn this video off, go play Silent Hill 2, and come back when you've finished it. This is your final warning.
Are you taping again? Come on. I don't know why, but I just love it here. It's so peaceful. You know what I heard? This whole area used to be a sacred place. I think I can see why. It's too bad we have to leave. Please promise you'll take me again, James.
We find out that James killed Mary. He killed her when she was sick to put her out of her misery, but we'll find out it's a little worse than that. Originally, the scene of Mary being killed was a lot more visceral, with Mary actually being heard suffocating, but they took it out of the game before release. The audio was found in the game files, and you can find it on YouTube with the game footage. It's pretty visceral. Laura finds James and he tells her that he killed Mary. James finally realizes this was all for nothing. Mary isn't here. She never was. Until he hears Mary's voice over the radio.
James, where are you? I'm waiting. I'm waiting for you. Please come to me. Do you hate me? Is that why you won't come? James?
That voice!
James? Please hurry. Are you lost?
This whole thing is an absolutely insane reveal, and it recontextualizes everything that we've known and seen so far. We can no longer view James as the sympathetic figure. There's a reason that he's here. At the same time, James has been struggling with his guilt in physical ways, and he just hasn't understood that, and neither have we. We're in a similar situation that we were in the first game with Harry. He was our confused figure that we could relate to, and James is the same way. But once we, James, and the player realize what happened, we can't look at each other the same ever again. Outside, the hotel has changed, and we're now in the alternate version. The doors are switched around, and entering one door may take you to a completely different area of the hotel. James goes to the study and finds an audio recording of him finding out Mary's condition was terminal.
I'm very sorry.
But you're a doctor. It's your job to heal people. How can you just let her die?
Please, calm down. As her doctor, I promise I'll do what I can. But there's still no effective treatment for her condition.
We head down to the flooded basement and find Angela on a flaming staircase.
Mama! Mama, I was looking for you. Now you're the only one left. Maybe then I can rest. Mama, why are you running away? You're not my mama.
She tells James that he can't do anything for her, and he looks disappointed. Angela asks for her knife back, and James says no.
It's hot as hell in here.
You see it too. For me, it's always like this.
We head up the stairs and come to a room with 9 save points on the wall, a direct message from Team Silent that we should probably save. James enters the room and Maria is being tortured above by 2 pyramid heads.
James!
Stop! Leave her alone! Leave us both the hell alone!
They stab her with a spear, killing her one more time, forcing James to relive this again.
I was weak. That's why I needed you. Needed someone to punish me for my sins. But that's all over now. I know the truth. Now it's time to end this.
We go to battle with the Pyramid Head duo, once and for all. This boss fight, again, is pretty simple. The hunting rifle is very accurate and has great range, so we can get distance from the two executioners and fire off a few shots before running away and repeating. When the battle is over, the two pyramid heads fall on their own spears, finally dead. James gathers 2 eggs from their bodies, unlocking the doors in front of him. He heads through, and in the long hallway, we can hear a conversation between James and Mary. She's saying that she's disgusting and she doesn't deserve to be treated well, and she tells James to go. She says that it'd be easier if she just died, telling James to leave and not come back, before realizing what she said and telling him to stay because she's scared. James runs upstairs and he finds a bed and Mary leaning on a windowsill.
Mary?
Wrong again. Mary's dead. You killed her.
Maria? Maria, I'm done with you.
What do you mean? But I can be yours. I'll be here for you forever. And I'll never yell at you or make you feel bad.
James says she isn't Mary, and Maria says she'll never let James have his Mary back. She then transforms into her true form, and we have our final boss fight. Maria will float around the arena and try to shoot clouds of moths at us that can be pretty damaging. She'll also try to strangle us if we get too close to her. We use the same strategy here as everything else and move back and forth on the battlefield, firing off rounds from the hunting rifle when we get the chance. Eventually, she goes down, and she says James' name while being forced to deliver the final blow. James is sitting next to Mary, sick and dying on the bed in front of him. James tells Mary that he couldn't watch her suffer, and that's why he killed her. He then says that part of him hated her for taking away his life.
You killed me, and you're suffering for it. It's enough, James.
She gives him a letter before dying. James carries her out of the room. We hear him enter a car and narrate.
Now I understand the real reason I came to this town. I wonder, what was I afraid of? Without you, Mary, I've got nothing.
A screen underwater with scrolling text and narration ends the game, showing us what was on the rest of the letter from the beginning of the game. We learn that James never wanted to see Mary, and that she felt bad for taking away James's life. She's about to go home for a short stay to say her goodbyes, and she's about to finally see James again. But Mary doesn't think James wants her to come home. She's sorry that she disgusts James, and she says she understands if James hates her. We learn fully that James didn't kill Mary out of selfishness, but out of contempt. I was tempted to play the entire letter here because it's probably one of the most emotional vocal performances I've ever heard in a video game. It's gut-wrenching to hear and changes everything we thought we knew about the story, but it's incredibly long, so I've only decided to play the end piece.
These last few years since I became ill, I am so sorry for what I did to you, did to us. You've given me so much, and I haven't been able to return a single thing. That's why I want you to live for yourself now. Do what's best for you, James. James, you made me happy.
I'm not gonna lie, I shed a couple tears every time I hear this. It's pretty rough to listen to. This, of course, isn't the only ending to Silent Hill 2, though. This is the in-water ending, which just so happened to be the ending I got on my playthrough for this video, my favorite ending, and the ending a lot of people consider the definitive one. But the truth is, there really isn't a canon ending to Silent Hill 2. You're supposed to have different endings, not because of missing side quests or optional items, but because of how you played the game. It's never certain which ending you're going to get, as there's many factors at play that influence which one is chosen, but you can do certain things to push it in one direction. To get the in-water ending, James has to act more suicidal throughout the playthrough. Examining Angela's knife in the inventory, reading the patient's diary on the hospital rooftop, looking at the message in Neely's bar, listening to the conversation between James and the doctor, and listening to the full conversation between James and Mary will all push you towards this ending. You'll also get closer to it if you leave your health lower throughout the game or don't use health items too quickly when it's low. There are 3 other main endings and 2 joke endings to go over though. The leave ending sees James being a bit more confrontational about not needing Maria before the boss battle. It's a little more subtle, but this one is sort of the opposite of the Maria ending. To get a higher chance of receiving the ending, we have to not follow Maria's directions when she tells us, and heal quickly after taking damage, showing that James wants to live. The sickbed conversation is mostly the same, but James is more honest about his hatred for Mary, but she asks why he looks so sad.
James. Please. Please do something for me. Go on with your life.
The letter is read, and we see Laura and James leaving the town through the graveyard. The Maria ending is more likely to appear when we follow everything Maria says, make sure she doesn't take damage, spend a long time with her before leaving her in the hospital, return and check on her, try to re-enter the room when she dies in the labyrinth, and not listen to the full conversation between James and Mary in the hospital. This, in general, is just James showing more comfort with Maria, and makes James think of her as the new Mary. James is leaning over the railing into Luca Park, and Maria approaches. James says he wants her, and it's okay that Mary's gone because he has Maria now. She gives him Mary's letter, and the letter is read before James and Maria leave the town together. The last non-joke ending is Rebirth, and you have to have beaten the game once. You have to collect multiple secret items throughout the game, including the books, Lost Memories and Crimson Ceremony, the Obsidian Goblet, and the White Chrism. James fights Maria the same, and we see him rowing in his boat on the lake. He's speaking to Mary and tells her that the old gods haven't left Silent Hill, and he plans to defy death, bringing Mary back to life. The first joke ending, the dog ending, is pretty infamous and requires you to have completed the game with the 3 normal endings or the rebirth ending. You have to find a doghouse and grab the dog key, which grants you access to the observation room on the 3rd floor of the Nightmare Lakeview Hotel. In here, we see that a dog has been observing and possibly controlling everything during the game.
お前の仕業だったのか?
James speaks in Japanese and falls to his hands and knees, letting the dog lick his face, and we get some interesting music. The last ending, the UFO ending, can be achieved by beating both scenarios with James and Maria, and picking up the blue gem at the beginning of the game. You use it at 3 locations throughout, and we see a silent film-style cutscene of James and Harry meeting. Harry is of course asking if he's seen a little girl around, and James is asking if anyone has seen Mary, before James is vaporized. With the release of the Xbox Special Edition, titled Silent Hill 2 Restless Dreams in North America, and Silent Hill 2 Interferes in Europe, and Silent Hill 2 Saigo no Uta, or Poem of the Last Moment in Japan, a sub-scenario was introduced to the game. This scenario was called Born from a Wish, and you play as Maria instead of James. It's only about an hour long and starts off with Maria holding a revolver in a room inside Heaven's Night. It seems that Maria was thinking about taking the bullet option out, and this is furthered by the fact that if we look at her revolver when we start, it's loaded but only with one bullet. The fact that Maria is in Heaven's Night before the start of the game shows how she had a key to the place when she met James. She wanders through the town and eventually finds the Baldwin mansion. She meets the owner of the house, who clearly wants to be left alone, named Ernest Baldwin. We solve a puzzle by finding 3 different colored boards and using them to strategically cover up the blue on this gravestone. This gives us a key which lets us access another part of the house. In the attic, we hear voices and find a birthday card and a present.
Give it to my daddy.
We head back to the room Ernest is in, but he's gone. He's been reading a book about sacred plants, and Maria finds another book in his study that is researching the resurrection of the dead. We tell him about the present that we found in the attic, and we realize that his daughter Amy died 10 years ago. He tells us to find a bottle of white liquid in the apartment next door, but he can't leave the place. We head over to the Blue Creek Apartments, and the bottle just so happens to be on the stand that holds the coin puzzle we complete with James. We grab the bottle and head back to Ernest. She asks if he's sure the process will work to bring his daughter back, and he says that gods are here. Maria wants to open the door, but Ernest says there's nothing beyond the door, a dead end.
So, what if I had said I believed in fate?
That James. He's a bad man.
James.
Maria doesn't know who that is at first, but then she agrees. Ernest says he's looking for the you that isn't you, the Maria that isn't Maria, Mary. Maria finally opens the door and no one is inside, but the birthday card sits on the table, the present open beside it, a pair of new gloves. Maria leaves, again wondering if she should take her exit, but she doesn't, tossing the revolver over the wall.
James.
We hear her first conversation with our main character, and the sub-scenario ends. Upon re-examination of the game, there's a lot of things to find. Most of the corpses in the game are actually James. They wear the same clothing as him, a green jacket and blue jeans. When James gets his flashlight, the mannequin is wearing Mary's clothes. The photos on the bed in Lakeview Hotel are of the characters and enemies in the game. Extra weapons can be obtained after beating the game and replaying it. You can obtain the hyper spray and chainsaw. So, what really happened in Silent Hill 2? Silent Hill 2's story, just like the other games, is hidden beneath, but that's the thing that sets this game apart from the rest, is that it doesn't continue the story of the first game, and it's less focused on what really happened than the psychological ramifications of the story. That being said, there's still something to be said here for the real story. We find out a lot more about the lore of Silent Hill and its history. The town has a dark history, and Native American tribes had seen a powerful force in the town. This power then turned to evil. The cult and their experiments with Alessa have caused the town to draw in people with dark pasts or that have done grave wrongs. This is why we see people like Angela, Eddie, and James drawn to the town. James's wife was sick with an illness and he couldn't watch her suffer, so he killed her. He's drawn to the town by the letter he receives from Mary. The The letter wasn't actually real though, and it was just the town pulling him in. Now, this is the interesting part. Not only does the town draw James in, but his subconscious is manifested in the town and reflected in every enemy we see, and Maria herself. The lying figures, faceless straitjackets represent James's inner agony, suffering, and isolation. The mannequins, long, slender legs represent James' sexual frustration, and Pyramid Head, the executioner, represents James's desire to punish himself for what he did. He's also forced to watch Maria, basically Mary, die over and over as further punishment. When he defeats Pyramid Head at the end, this is him symbolically getting over his guilt and leaving it in the past. But what about everyone else? They weren't all reflections of James's subconscious. Angela was abused by her father when she was younger, and she killed him for it. She's been pulled to Silent Hill because of this and is looking for her mother and brother to find peace. Eddie was bullied in high school and took this out on his football coach, killing his dog and shooting him. Laura is an orphan that became friends with Mary after meeting her in the hospital. She doesn't seem to have been drawn to the town for a dark past, though, because she isn't affected by the monsters of the town. But what ending was true? Well, the whole point of Silent Hill 2 is kind of that there isn't any true ending. You're supposed to interpret it for yourself, and even some of this story interpretation is up for debate. The game is supposed to be read into, dissected, and picked apart, but it can also mean different things to different people. The story and its characters overall is so genuinely impactful. They're all incredibly interesting, and you're constantly wondering what their motives are, why they're here, and we never really fully have an idea of what's going on. This could be because they're just abstract archetypes, exaggerated versions of emotions, feelings, reactions to death or killing. The story and the way that the team plays with narrative structure is also genuinely interesting. Experiencing the story another time, though, might as well be the second half of the game, because finding new pieces of information or old pieces of information, but with the knowledge of what James really did, is an ending in and of itself. The game is just as atmospheric as the first. The environments are laid out to a T. Everything is done to a masterful degree, and every little piece of information, every item, sound, enemy, word spoken is done with purpose and meaning. Nothing is pointless here, and nothing drags on. It's gray fog sweeping in, sounds and music pumping through your ears at all the right moments, not only to make you feel fear, but to make you weep. This game takes a total step up from the previous one, not only because it's improved the horror component, but because it's managed to make a story that terrifies and wrenches at your heart. It's a story that people have been trying to recreate for decades now, and have never managed to fulfill that goal. Silent Hill 2 is not just a great horror game, but it's one of the best gaming experiences you can ever have. Silent Hill 2 sold over 1 million copies the month of its release. Most critics rated the game favorably, saying it was an overall upgrade, but not as compelling as the first game. They especially focused on the increased graphics and atmosphere. The puzzles were not seen as challenging, and this was a low point for critics. Despite some criticism, the game sold well and has gone on to be considered one of the best horror games of all time. Of course, Konami wanted to capitalize on this and would follow it up 2 years later with a sequel, but we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad. Hey Dad, just wanted to say really quickly that I really appreciate all of your support and it means so much to me. If you want to support the channel further, you can do so on Patreon, where I provide a monthly update video and also early access to the retrospectives. You can also follow me on Twitch and Twitter to see what else I'm up to, and I have a Discord with a small little burgeoning community. The links for all those are also in the description. Again, thank you for everything. Bye, Dad.